This is Metro Week, our top story, updating downtown redevelopment. We'll talk to those involved in planning and carrying out the changes.
I think it's an important part of the community. It's getting better and better, but it's a great place right now.
We're only about a third of the way through of the capacity for growth and development and the economic benefits that occur from that in downtown.
Plus, our Journalists Roundtable analyzes the week's economic news.
What do you build in that empty space that's still out there that makes it even more successful, I think is a good question.
I'm Andrea Kelly. We're looking at downtown redevelopment this week, starting with the past. In 1985, the city of Tucson considered borrowing money to pay for renovating some downtown arts venues. Here's an AZPM From the Vault segment produced by our colleagues at Arizona Illustrated.
In September, the Tucson Pima Arts Council asked a team of consultants to look at the city's cultural needs. The consultant recommends upgrading the community center's Little Theater for $500,000, the Music Center for $1 million, and building a new outdoor amphitheater for $1.5 million, all to be paid for by bond issues. The consultant recommends that the historic Temple of Music and Art become the new permanent home of the Arizona Theater Company, but it does not suggest where ATC might find the nearly $6 million necessary to buy and restore this condemned building. The consultant also recommends spending $2.5 million to renovate the downtown library and make it into a cultural center, including a small theater. The consultant says the art districts enhance the face of cities at night. Councilman Tom Volge moved Tucson accept the recommendations. The motion passed unanimously to applause. But City Manager Joel Valdez warned no money has yet been allocated. Mayor Lou Murphy cautioned that funding sources for new performing venues are unclear.
If the community can accept this as a blueprint for its future, it can look toward determining the methodology for accomplishing it.
The consultant did not recommend renovating the Fox or Rialto theaters downtown, saying it would be too expensive and there is no proven demand for their use.
That was a segment from The Vault, a series which appears on Arizona Illustrated. Next, my interview with Jan Cervelli, Dean of the University of Arizona's College of Architecture, Planning, and Landscape Architecture. So downtown redevelopment seemed to be taking a while to get going, and then suddenly it sprouted really quickly on the east end of downtown. Can you evaluate the overall progress of downtown redevelopment for us?
Well, I think it's quite the success story, and it's captured a lot of attention nationally. I think it's been driven by three things. One, obviously, is the investment in the modern streetcar. So that permanent infrastructure has driven a lot of private investment in addition to the public investment. I think, too, we're beginning to see across the country, with some of the demographic change and the growth of millennials and boomers more interested in moving into urban centers, a real demand for a live and vibrant downtown. And thirdly, I think the leadership has come together here in Tucson, both from the public and private sector, to get over some of the hurdles and the barriers that have occurred in the past. So it's been a good alignment of stars.
Do those hurdles typically crop up in downtown planning situations? Does it take a while to get going?
Absolutely, and we always have to remember that many of these types of endeavors take 20 plus 30 years, and we usually want to see results really quickly. But we're beginning to see a lot of the pieces that were put into place from administrations from the past, from business investment in the past. The recession certainly slowed it down, I think, actually. But we're beginning to see all of those pieces come together.
Your College of Architecture, Planning, and Landscape Architecture is one of a few U of A components that are downtown now. Do you consider that part of the redevelopment process?
I hope, and I do believe that we've played a role in advocating and beginning to shed some light on best practices in planning policy and good urban design. We intend to continue to be that force, from our students working on various projects downtown. Our faculty and our college administration have been heavily involved in many of the different design review committees and in many of the policy developments there. And so I think we've had a role, and we look forward to a lot more.
Have you personally been asked to advise or consult on any of the downtown redevelopment projects?
Yes, I think I've been very privileged to be very involved. I played a role in helping to advise the redevelopment of the planning department for the city into more of an integrated department. I serve as the board chair of the Downtown Tucson Partnership that represents all the businesses downtown and all of the nonprofit associations and the business improvement district contributors. I'm on many different design review committees. I'm on the Urban Land Institute Implementation Committee. So these have been terrific opportunities for me to play a role, and I've really enjoyed it, and hopefully I've been able to contribute. But I've also brought in many faculty and students as well. So it's been a full-blown college effort.
What would you say is missing and versus what's working downtown at this point?
Well, I like to look at urban redevelopment as occurring in phases and stages, and they're somewhat predictable. We've seen in communities across the country, the first phase typically is where you have the artist community moving into downtown urban areas. With that comes student populations. That starts to stimulate many of the restaurants and the entertainment venues. So we've seen all of this in Tucson itself. With the streetcar, I think now we're beginning to see businesses interested in locating and relocating from other parts of the community in downtown. We're beginning to see housing, which is usually the next phase. Now it's been predominantly student housing, but we're seeing some private market rate housing as well. The next phase that we'll begin to see is downtown becoming a real residential area. So more of that market rate housing. You're seeing growing demand by millennials who want to live, again, and work in an urban center where they can walk. They have choices of different transportation modes, whether they're the streetcar, the bus, bicycle, walking. The car is just one of many options. They're really not that keen on cars, interestingly enough. But also boomers are looking to relocate in those same urban areas. So you're going to see, I think, a real boom in residential development and infill capacity. With that will come more retail as the services and the demand for those services will grow with that residential component.
So you're talking about the trend of how downtowns typically develop. What specifically still needs to happen for downtown Tucson redevelopment for you to define it as complete or even successful?
I do believe it's that residential component, and many of the groups and the Urban Land Institute discussions have centered around how do we incentivize that housing.
And you mean expanding it beyond what's really the student housing that's
Correct,
coming?
absolutely.
Okay.
And it needs to occur on different levels of market rate. So we still have a demand for affordable housing, but also different ranges of economic market. And that will stimulate the growth of population, the densification. If you look at downtown, there are some very large properties that are vacant. So I think we've estimated recently that there's about 3.3 million square feet of undeveloped property downtown. So we've just seen, we're only about a third of the way through of the capacity for growth and development and the economic benefits that occur from that in downtown.
Right. Jean Cervelli, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Downtown is the hub of many events the Visit Tucson Tourism Office promotes. I spoke with Dan Gibson about how Visit Tucson incorporates a transitioning downtown into its marketing strategy. Dan, what is Visit Tucson's message about downtown redevelopment when you're trying to market the city elsewhere?
So the tourism business has changed somewhat. Previously, conventions would come into hotels and resorts, and usually they'd stay there. They wanted an experience that was largely on the property. But for us, we're noticing trends that people want to see an urban area. They want to go out. They want to see what a city has to offer. So the downtown redevelopment has been really a positive thing for us, that we can tell that story as part of when we pitch groups. We tell them about things happening at Hotel Congress or about the dining options downtown.
If someone came to town 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, they might not have seen as much to do downtown at night or as many restaurants or even as much housing, places to stay. What do you get people who are worried about what's here to do downtown in Tucson?
It's almost a part of every pitch we make to conventions or groups. It's almost always a part of it to say, yes, and there's this vibrant place downtown. We play up the options of Mexican food across town, but we try to give people an idea that this is a city where there are things to do. It's a fun place to be beyond just a great place to meet.
How do you balance some of the modern amenities and the new things there are to do downtown with the historic nature of some parts of the city and some of the reasons that people might come to Tucson when you're trying to draw them?
It's almost just a different pitch for different types of people. Like European visitors want the cowboys and the Indians. They want this really rustic thing, and people in their 40s and 50s, they're more drawn to like the Desert Museum and maybe Pima Air and Space. But you notice like that a lot of these decisions are made by millennials, and millennials want they want an urban experience. They want something that they can go to different bars and they can experience nightlife and things like that. So that's a big part of just how we pitch that age group particularly.
When we were talking before this interview, you said Visit Tucson does not have a full spate of stats on how much downtown Tucson contributes to the overall metro economy. Sure. Is that something you're working on finding out?
Yeah, no, we find that out. We try to find that out about like why travelers are coming, where they spend their money. We do those surveys every few years, and so there's one coming up, and that will really see how much especially the visitor spends in the downtown area.
And of course, right now, the gem shows are happening all over town, including downtown. Economic impact of that, where do you measure that?
So we did the study on the gem show last year, and that was $120 million in direct spending in this market. And they've added shows since last year, and we expect that there are more visitors this year. So a lot of that is happening around the downtown corridor. A lot of the shows are connected by the streetcar, and so that's something we really talk about in our brochures and say, like, listen, there are a lot of places to go, a lot of things to do. You can go to the gem show, and then you still get a great meal as well.
Who are you talking to when you're putting that message out? Where is Tucson targeting those guests from?
A lot of our work is in cold weather markets, especially because obviously if you're in Chicago right now or Baltimore or anywhere else, you're looking at 10 degrees, something like that. So it's easy to sell in our peak season, which is February through April. It's easy to sell Tucson to those people. So that's something we really try to point out. In Chicago, for example, we have a wrap around one of the elevated trains that goes through the city that says, visit Tucson. It's got pictures of people hiking, things like that.
Okay. And, there's plans for a new hotel downtown. I believe it's a Marriott, although I might be wrong about that.
It's a boutique version of a Marriott.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and of course, some of the bed tax, some of the tax that people pay when they stay in a hotel goes to fund Visit Tucson. We should say that.
Right.
But I don't feel like I've heard a lot about there being no capacity, no vacancies downtown, and a high demand for beds downtown. So what's the purpose of that hotel, and is it meeting a need that we have right now?
It's really, the thing is that if you want to activate the Tucson Convention Center and you want to have conventions and large-scale events in the convention center, which you really don't have many now other than the Jehovah's Witnesses that come every year, you do have to have rooms in that immediate downtown area. And they just aren't there. I mean, there's Hotel Tucson, there's the River Park Inn, and and the further on, the University Marriott. You just don't have those nexus of rooms downtown. So you're only really offering one thing to people. You're offering just the resort experience when you're offering conventions. You can't offer something that, say, a New Orleans does with hotels right on Bourbon Street, or even Phoenix, which is adding a ton of hotel rooms downtown. So we can't offer that urban, a lifestyle experience that's really appealing to millennials. The boutique hotel will help in that to some extent. But the more rooms you can put downtown, the more likely that we are to book them, that you can see that sort of occupancy grow.
What is missing and what is working downtown?
I think what is working is that, having been in Tucson a long time, you used to go downtown because you had a reason to go. You would say, okay, well, we're going to go to Cup Cafe and then we'll go dancing at Congress. Now people can just stop. They can just go downtown, park in one of the many spaces, and decide what they want to do later. And that's something we can offer to visitors as well. What's missing is still that hotel component. I mean, you're still missing the sort of things that make it more livable for people downtown. Johnny Gibson's Market will help in that regard.
That's a grocery store slated to open in about a year or so?
Exactly. It should be opening sometime this year on 6th Avenue and Congress. But, you don't have a Trader Joe's or a Whole Foods, and you don't have sort of really much retail at all. Retail has so far struggled downtown with Buffalo Exchange closing last year. So it still just needs to become more of a core space for people to live. Right now it's a place that people can live and they can work somewhat, but then they have to leave for some of the things that they need.
And what would be the way that you would define downtown redevelopment as a success, or the Visit Tucson would define it?
For us, it's just something we can offer people, that we can give them a destination, something that we can put in front of them that says, you know, we can compete with the Austins and the Denvers and these big cities that attract these conventions. That's just something we need to have that we can tell people about.
Dan Gibson of Visit Tucson, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Now for the commercial real estate perspective. I spoke with Buzz Isakson of the real estate firm CBRE. He's sold or leased thousands of commercial properties in Tucson, including downtown. Well, first let's start by laying out what's available downtown in terms of real estate. How much of downtown, what percentage, is office space versus, say, retail or residential?
Retail is generally in the ground floor. The office buildings downtown are typically multi-story. So the amount of office space would be 6 or 7 times the amount of retail space.
And recently, we've seen some restaurants close. I mean, things are always coming and going downtown. Do you think that part of the market has reached market capacity?
No, I think it takes a while to sort out which concepts are going to be successful. The supply of restaurants has grown more rapidly than demand, and demand is all based on residents and jobs and people downtown. So we've outpaced the number of people a little bit with the supply of restaurants, and that will take some time to get sorted out. But I think there is still room for good concepts.
You focus on office commercial
Yes,
development. So can you give us an idea how that has changed, maybe some perspective of how that has changed as downtown development has evolved?
30 years ago, downtown was a financial center for Tucson. That's where the bank presidents worked and all the office workers that were related to banks and lending. It, of course, was the government center, and it was the legal center. 30 years ago, most lawyers thought if you had an office, you needed to be downtown, and that has changed. The financial centers have moved to Phoenix and Minneapolis and San Francisco and elsewhere, so what's downtown is more bank branches than bank regional headquarters. Lawyers have spread out all over Tucson. There was an exodus of law firms from downtown when all the new office condos got built in Tucson in the last 5 to 10 years. And government has contracted. When we hit the financial crisis in 2007, government vacated and gave back a lot of space downtown. So we're still trying to backfill all of that space.
What is your goal? What are you working on as you try to fill that space?
My business is jobs, and office buildings, when you think about it, are just jobs in a box. And so we're always talking about job creation. And overall in the community, we haven't done a good job with office employment. So it's not a downtown problem, it's a citywide problem. Office spaces all over Tucson are underoccupied. Our absorption isn't where it needs to be. So we need to get in the job creation business, both downtown and across town.
So that sounds like one goal. What else do you see as next in the evolution of downtown redevelopment?
A big leader downtown has been food and entertainment. People are attracted to that with the streetcar. The community is excited about downtown. Downtown has been reactivated. If you're downtown today with the Gem Show, the restaurants are all hopping. There's people in the streets. The weather's fantastic. So the community is in the process of rediscovering downtown. Some people are moving into downtown, both with their homes and with their office space. That needs to pick up. We've proven that there's residential demand. There have been several new successful residential projects, one brand new, a couple of redevelopments. I think we'll see a lot of new residential construction. There's vacant office space. The office vacancy downtown is about 30%. So as we fill those spaces up, they'll support more residential growth, more restaurants. A big thing for downtown is that the U of A finally has a presence down there. And with the streetcar connecting the U of A to downtown, I think we can expect a lot more growth from the university. And that's a big boost for downtown.
What do you think is missing, and what do you think is working in downtown redevelopment?
Jobs are missing. We really need jobs. Residents are great. Like we had a beautiful new mixed-use project built at Broadway and Stone, and it's 24 units, and there's 30 or 40 people living there, and that's terrific. But a big employer has a bigger impact than that. And when employment increases downtown, some of those employees will want to live downtown. They'll go out for lunch, they'll go out for happy hour, they'll get involved in downtown and support it. So I'm a big promoter of jobs.
What's working downtown?
Food and entertainment is working. A lot of those places are successful. The arts has always been a big deal downtown, and that's flourishing, I think, more than ever. The Rialto Theater, the Fox Theater, those are a really big deal. Entertainment. It's the cultural center of downtown. The Children's Museum, all of those things are a big deal, and it's gotten people re-engaged with downtown.
And I've asked this question of our other guests. How do you define Tucson's downtown redevelopment success? What would that look like? How will we know when we get there?
I think we're there in many ways, and we always want more. The new hotel at Broadway and Fifth Avenue is great. I've worked downtown for 30 years, and I've always enjoyed it. I've always thought it was interesting. I think it's a cool place. I think it's an important part of the community. It's getting better and better, but it's a great place right now. A good friend of mine named Corky Poster, who does a lot of work downtown, he's an architect, said downtown is finished and it's never finished. So it's cool right now, and people that haven't been down there should check it out. There's people everywhere, there's excitement, there's energy that wasn't there not that long ago, but it's always been an interesting, cool place to be.
Buzz Isakson, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lorraine Rivera. Next on Arizona Week, proposed cuts to higher education, what it could mean for struggling students.
Any increase on tuition, it's just, it would be hard to stay in school.
Now our journalist roundtable. Joining me in the studio is my colleague Zach Ziegler of Arizona Public Media and Thelma Grimes of Tucson Local Media. Thelma, let's start on this topic of downtown redevelopment. What's your perspective, based on your reporting and those of your employees at Inside Tucson Business, of how this redevelopment effort is going?
I think it's interesting, especially in the last year with the streetcar. I think that streetcar brought some energy down there. I mean, we had years of kind of this pessimistic, nothing's happening attitude. Streetcar comes along and suddenly restaurants are coming. It seems a little more booming, a little more excitement, and I think the point about the student aspect is huge down there right now with the apartment complexes coming in, students riding the streetcars. I think that's a big part of it.
I think one thing that can be easy to forget is one thing that Gene Cervelli touched on, which is that some of what we're seeing today was actually put into place many years ago, some of the policies or the beginning of development plans. So that historical perspective is interesting too. Zach, you've been working on a commercial real estate update overall with the city. What are you learning about downtown?
As far as downtown, you really do still see a lot of vacancies, particularly in offices. The last report I saw, about 30% of the offices already built in downtown were sitting there vacant. When I actually talked to Ike Isakson a little bit about this, he told me that a big problem is the age of the buildings, and technology has progressed, and there are just certain things you don't think about. When you look at a building that was built in the 70s or the 80s, you need more power plugs, you need internet built into the building. And that kind of has been the issue is, well, it's not valuable enough to update or to just tear down and rebuild, but there are slightly newer buildings elsewhere that people want to move into.
I think the interesting aspect of that is how much land they said is not developed down there. And when it comes to commercial real estate, the question becomes, what do you develop? He brings up office spaces that may be outdated. Do you build office space? Or like Dan Gibson pointed out, do you build grocery stores, which brings residents? What do you build in that empty space that's still out there that makes it even more successful? I think is a good question.
One of the things we heard is working is the entertainment scene, which was interesting to contrast to that 1985 story saying we don't need the Fox and the Rialto. But what did you guys think of the interviews, the answers to the question of what is successful downtown? Thelma?
I think they're right on the restaurant aspect. I would say in the last year, especially restaurants down there, they're doing really well. They seem to be, anytime you go down there, they're full at night, and especially right now with the gem show going on, they're full. And I think the restaurant scene is great, and then we've always had that art scene, the Arizona Theater Company and all of that. Tucson is really rich in that history. So.
And Zach, the definition that downtown is successful right now that Buzz Isakson said, what do you think of that?
I think it's successful in that it's walking in the right steps. We are having success in revitalizing downtown and rebuilding it, building it into something new. He had talked about the fact that it used to be a very big place for banking and for lawyers, but now it is becoming more of that urban center, and you were slowly seeing it walk along those steps. But just like Jan Cervelli said, she outlined those steps, and you kind of sit there and follow and go, yeah, I see it, I can follow.
And one of the things Buzz Isakson said is that there needs to be jobs downtown. And another big news story this week was that Rosemont Copper Company, which is obviously not downtown, it's in the Santa Rita Mountains if it gets permitted, has received a state certification for water quality. What does that mean in this other big jobs arena here, mining in Arizona? What does that certificate allow?
Well, that certificate is just another step along in the process. There's, boy, it seems like when you're talking about steps to getting a copper mine open, they're walking up a 10-story building as far as how many steps there are. This is just finding a place to put the tailings, the dirt, because obviously with the mine, you got to put the dirt somewhere. And this was finding a place where the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality felt that could be put and it wouldn't do environmental damage. Now, there were issues. They had said they were okay with this plan earlier, but the Environmental Protection Agency and Game and Fish in Pima County all weren't necessarily happy with the plan. We'll see where it goes now, and obviously we do still have 2 steps. We have the Forest Service has to okay the plan. That we will see more of where the endangered species in the area come into play, and we also have the Army Corps of Engineers plan still to come and be okayed through that.
As a beat reporter, I have to admit, I started covering this in 2005 when it just started, just applied for it. How many years or how much longer are we looking at?
We could still be years away on this. That's the unbelievable thing, because not only do we have these last few steps, but then you have any appeals that go through from groups such as Save the Scenic Santa Ritas, the Sierra Club, Center for Biological Diversity. Any of them might get involved with lawsuits challenging any of these permits, any of the steps that will just drag it out for even longer. But it just goes to show how much money could actually come out of a mine like this, that people are willing to stick around and keep trying to open this mine for that many years.
Thelma, in Inside Tucson Business this week, one of your reporters reported that some banks along the southern border are closing, and that's having an impact on the agricultural producers there. What's happening?
This was actually an interesting story that came out we were looking at. With drug cartel issues and that kind of thing, the Department of Justice has come in and kind of told these banks, they've warned them, we'll shut you down if you're funneling money through large amounts of money, things that come from drug cartels, that kind of thing. So the banks in reaction have basically decided to close down rather than deal with it, which in turn has hurt farmers and agriculture a lot.
What are the options for the farmers and the people in the agriculture industry who were relying on these banks?
So right now it's literally seed money. They need to borrow that money each year to get their seeds in the ground, get the produce going, and so right now with none of these banks lending, they need to find another option. Senator John McCain has gotten involved. He's written letters. Nothing really happened last year with that. Senator Steve Farley at the state levels, he's looking at this year maybe getting the state to funnel some money into the smaller banks that are willing to invest this money in this industry.
In that story, you mentioned that Senator Steve Farley says there's about $20 billion sort of sitting around in various state funds at any given time that could be used to start a state bank. What is he referencing? We also hear about a state deficit, so what is that money?
This is money that's, it's funneled into these banks and it goes towards businesses and that kind of thing. And most of the time it goes into big banks or that kind of thing. Some states have what's called a state bank, and that money goes into that, and that goes directly to those businesses.
Is this an issue that he's actually introduced legislation to create a state bank?
Short-term solution is not to create a state bank this year. That's going to take more time. So the short-term solution is to go with smaller banks that are already here.
And does this affect anybody else in the state outside of that border zone?
The most we've heard right now is just the agriculture and farmers along the southern Arizona border.
And then it's all based in the issue of whether or not those banks may or may not have been funneling cartel money all along.
Right.
Okay, that's something that we've seen decades of crackdown on in Arizona.
Right.
All right, well, we'll talk about some of these issues as we continue throughout the year. I appreciate both of you coming in this week. Thank you. That's it for this week. For more on this week's news, including stories that aired on NPR 89.1, go to our website. Now Arizona Week reports on how the state's higher education system is planning to deal with proposed budget cuts.